I'm a guy who prefers strong, independent women. Just ask my wife, Peggy. So it's understandable why I find the flappers so fascinating. The flapper phenomena originated in the early 1920s as women threw off the shackles of male dominated society and truly came into their own as a social and even political force. Their association with the jazz music scene is an inescapable element of their story. Now, there's some confusion as to how the word flapper came into use to describe young women in this context. It may have come from northern England, where it had come to mean teenage girl, or one whose hair is not yet put up and whose pigtail flapped on her back. Or perhaps from an older word for prostitute. The William and Mary Morris Dictionary of Word and Phrase Origin defines flappers as, quote, a giddy, attractive, and slightly unconventional young thing who, in H.L. Mencken's words, was a somewhat foolish girl, full of wild surmises and inclined to revolt against the precepts and admonitions of her elders. In any event, though, in a modern sense, the word flapper appeared in print as early as 1903 when novelist Desmond Coke used it in his story of Oxford life, Sandford of Merton, stating in one passage, "There's a stunning flapper." In April 1908, the fashion section of London's The Globe and Traveller contained a drawing of a flapper and reference to flappers offering the following explanation: Americans and those fortunate English folk whose money and status permit them to go freely for slang terms call the subject of these lines the flapper. The appropriateness of this term does not move me to such wholehearted admiration of the amazing powers of enriching our language which the Americans modestly acknowledge they possess, and in fact would scarcely merit the honor of a moment of my attention, but for the fact that I seek in vain for any other expression that is understood to signify that important young person, the maiden of some 16 years. So that's not a very flattering picture. By 1912, the New York Times interviewed London theater reporter John Tiller, who described a flapper as belonging to a slightly older age group, a girl who has just come out. In other words, has made a formal entry into society upon reaching womanhood. On the outbreak of World War I on July 28, 1914, the nascent emergence of the flapper took a backseat to more pressing concerns, particularly after the U.S. entered the conflict on April 6, 1917. Almost overnight, the role of women changed as they entered the workforce in massive numbers to replace the men who had been sent off to fight the war. Suddenly, women were thrust into positions traditionally occupied by men, giving them a renewed sense of importance and a measure of liberty they had never known before. After the men returned, many women were unwilling to return to the life they had known. This uncertain future resulted in societal upheaval and, in some cases, backlash against these, quote, uppity women. An article in the London Times entitled "The Flapper's Future" noted that the meaning of the term changed somewhat to apply to independent, pleasure-seeking, khaki-crazy young women. It was in May 1920 a silent film comedy called The Flapper was released. It was the first film to portray the flapper lifestyle. By that time, the term had taken on the full meaning of the flapper as we understand it today. At the same time, women were earning the right to vote in most of Europe and the United States, giving them, for the first time, a voice in politics. The first flapper film to achieve major success was 1923's Flaming Youth, starring Colleen Moore. Also in 1923, the British play The Dancers opened. Now, this production starred Tallulah Bankhead. This play examined the dance obsession of two flappers, and as we'll see, dance became a big part of the flapper culture. Louise Brooks, whose first starring role was in 1926's Love 'Em and Leave 'Em, became the iconic flapper girl who everyone wanted to emulate. Tall and glamorous with the classic bob haircut, Louise actually started a career as a dancer, making her perfect for roles in such productions as The Society Celebrity and Evening Clothes. Part of Brooks's allure was her flaunting of sexual taboos. She posed in the nude for art photography and was twice married, though she nonetheless had a number of dalliances with others, both men and women. Her biographer, Barry Parrish, noted that, quote, the operative rule with Louise was neither heterosexuality, homosexuality, nor bisexuality. It was just sexuality. That is a remarkably progressive statement, even now, almost a full century later. Unlike some of her contemporaries, she actually lived to a rather ripe old age of 78, finally succumbing to a heart attack. Clara Bow was the original It Girl, referring to her role in the 1927 silent film It. Actually, Bow's career had started much earlier with her appearance in 1922's Beyond the Rainbow. In fact, Bow did not appear in a talkie until a trio of films she starred in were released in 1929. Uh, by the time The Wild Party, The Saturday Night Kid, and Dangerous Curves were released, Clara was already a bona fide movie star with dozens of films to her credit. 1925's The Plastic Age was the first of her films that embodied all the scandalous activities attributed to the flappers: illicit drinking, dancing at illegal roadhouses, and getting frisky in the backseat of cars. Personally, I have yet to watch this film, but it's now on my list. Sounds like a lot of fun. What Bow lacked in seductive sensuality, she more than made up for in raw and open sexuality. It was something she made no attempt to hide. In fact, she played on it. But despite the rumors, Clara Bow wasn't the wild child she often portrayed on screen. She was married only twice, to Rex Bell for 31 years no less, and had 2 children. If nothing else, she was an intelligent woman with a no-nonsense attitude. She was liberated and unafraid, playing with gender roles and stereotypes, and had only contempt for those who turned up their nose at her due to her views. She, as much as any of her contemporaries, embodied what the flapper truly was. So that's great, you may say, but what do flappers have to do with jazz? Well, the flapper lifestyle and jazz music are inextricably linked. One of the most popular pastimes of the flapper girl was dancing. And what did they dance to? Why, jazz, of course. Jazz was symbolic of the tearing down of the old order and introducing fun to the world of music, much like rock and roll in the 1950s and 60s. Like that revolution, dancing was a big part of it. Dances such as the Charleston, Black Bottom, and the Shimmy were considered scandalous by older generations, but were a major part of the jazz scene. The May 1920 edition of the Atlantic Monthly stated that flappers trot like foxes, limp like lame ducks, one step like cripples, and all to the barbaric yawp of strange instruments which transformed the whole scene into a moving picture of fancy ball and bedlam. Well, without jazz, there would have been no flappers. And no discussion of flappers would be complete without a short rundown of flapper fashion. New designs were necessary to facilitate the movement necessary for the new energetic dances. Gone were the tight-fitting restrictive corsets in favor of lighter and looser lingerie. In flaunting gender roles, flappers flocked into the styles of designers like Coco Chanel, who introduced the garçon or little boy look. To look more like a boy, women tightly wound their chests with strips of cloth in order to flatten it. Flappers also favored rayon stockings with garter belts and high-heeled shoes. The hem of the skirts also started to rise, a flapper skirt typically falling to just below the knee, which was pretty high back in those days. Hairstyles also changed with the bob, which was later replaced by an even shorter haircut called the shingle or the Eton cut. The shingle was slicked down and had a curl on each side of the face that covered the woman's ears. Flappers often finished that ensemble with a felt bell-shaped hat called the cloche. Flappers also started wearing makeup, which had previously been frowned upon as something that had only been worn by loose women. Rouge, powder, eyeliner, and lipstick became extremely popular. Of course, my Uncle Ben Pickering, being a jazz musician, had his share of flappers wishing to make his acquaintance. Here are a couple of photos of some of Ben's female admirers. Unfortunately, I don't have any names associated with these young ladies, but I wish I did. They look like they were a lot of fun. Here are a couple of pictures that I ran across. These are all pictures of flappers that I picked up from some of Uncle Ben's photographs, and so enjoy these as I scroll through them. Well, that's all for this week. Listen, if you like these episodes, I ask you to hit the subscribe button. It helps me out. And if you have any input whatsoever on my episodes, by all means, drop me a comment. I read every comment that anybody submits, and I love hearing from my audience. And thanks. We'll see you next week.